Sure, and I've got a few slides. I just want to welcome everyone to this session. I've been listening since this morning on and off, and for the last couple of hours, and fascinating speakers, and all credit to Resurgence and the ecologists for putting together a brilliant days of speakers. There's so many things that link, I think, with the themes that I'm going to sort of touch on, which is to talk about climate change, the COVID crisis, and what community action can do at this point in time. I'm going to speak a little bit about my experiences recently, where my body, my energy, my inspiration has come from, which is in Camden. I live in Camden, and back in, well, almost 2 years ago, almost to the date, I joined Extinction Rebellion after having done a 8-month-long course at Schumacher called Call of the Wild, where I was camping in the redwoods. So there's a real connection with, that time that I spent in Totnes, in Dartington, on the estates, thinking about the many amazing speakers, thinkers, and the different movements that were held, inspired, and being fomented for this stage. And I think from my time there, which came from a period of intense grief and burnout and depression, with my own work, which had been as an international climate strategist and a lawyer working for the vulnerable countries in the small island states, in the Paris negotiations. I've been an advisor in the UN negotiations since 1991. My hair is now completely white. It started off as a young woman at age 24, very much not white. And I felt that we'd reached a point where we had to completely rethink how we went about thinking of global action and its linkage with land, with food, with soil, with mycelium, with nature. And COVID, in fact, was nowhere on the horizon. We'd had many pandemics before that, but nothing on the scale that we've now find ourselves in. Let me just put the slides on fully. There you go. So yes, right now, for us, we're seeing the first and those second sort of tsunami waves, overwhelming our current way of life, overwhelming the way in which business as usual has been undertaken. And we had wished that we had anticipated and seen better what was coming. In fact, both the pandemic, the recession, and now climate chaos, I prefer calling it climate chaos to climate change, because that's more truthful, and the biodiversity crisis have all been, they're not surprises. These have been predicted and talked about by scientists for decades. Schumacher, small is beautiful, the way in which the system was lurching towards ecological and social collapse has been in the literature. The Club of Rome reports back in the 70s have anticipated the way in which these systemic problems would lead to a cliff edge for humanity, as well as ecosystems, as well as the vulnerable people of the world who put their faith in governments and who put their faith in scientists, who put their faith in multilateral negotiations such as the climate change ones that I had been part of. And what I've sort of learned really is, I think we were doing a lot of things really well and correctly, but we hadn't really reshaped and rethought our relationship with the land and with food primarily. And I think what we need to do is create much denser, richer relationships, which are really inclusive of all people to the land. And one of the thoughts I had, when I was doing this course at Schumacher, thinking in those woods is, I love England more than England loves me. I can't speak about the story of England and the way it represents itself, and Britain represents itself. And this is 400 years we're celebrating in some parts of the there are celebrations of the 4-year 100 voyage of the Mayflower and Speedwell from Plymouth, which went off to discover a new world, when in fact there wasn't a new world. There were lots of people living there before time. So I think one of the things that we have to talk about is how our own history can be reinvented, rethought, reshaped, uncovered, and truthfully talked about from all of the people who now live in this land, who 400 years later are here for one reason or another, and how all of the different crises that we face, a huge crisis in inequality, a huge crisis globally, now threatening the very existence of countries that fought for their independence, that fought against colonialism, fought against imperialism, only now to face almost uninhabitable conditions, i.e. extinction, sort of ecocide plus ecological collapse, is equivalent to extinction. So I think for me, the rethinking of that must go very fundamentally. We all have to think and do something very different. And we have to overcome the separation of body and brain, of the thinking, our brain and intellect, from our emotions, from this Cartesian split that we've had in our epistemology for the last 300 years, which has meant that we are always disembodied and always acting without really fully considering the impacts on our bodies or on Mother Earth. So I've thought of this idea, which has been given expression actually in Camden Council. We worked very closely with a whole range of NGOs, with a whole range of thinkers and doers, people who are not just academics or thought leaders, divorced from their own community, but who are ordinary citizens who are going to shape and think and strategize together to reimagine and reshape our neighborhoods, and through that reshape and reimagine a world which is very different from capitalism. So I think I want to stress that most people's experience of capitalism is on their high street, and that's where we should start. We should rebuild our high streets. We should start by putting disused and underused properties and assets into a different form of collaborative, creative ownership or usage. And that's what we've tried to do in Camden, to essentially work with the council. The shop that you see here now no longer exists, but for about 6 months, we had that shop, converted it into a sort of temporary pop-up community action hub. We thought it was really cool to have a shop where you went in and in fact you didn't buy anything, subverting the very idea of shopping, and where actually what you did was sit and discuss with your fellow citizens, with council staff, with politicians, what was needed to overcome the barriers to a more just, a more green, a kinder world for everyone. And the kind of methodologies that we use were to have kind of hackathons, to encourage artists to come and talk about their experience, to have Extinction Rebellion events, to run a community kitchen. There was always a cup of tea that was available and open. And the idea is essentially to reverse this 400-year experience of privatization and the takeover of community assets by creating temporary community assets to make sure that we have community wealth rebuilt, and to that is done in an inclusive way, and that helps tackle all of the different dimensions of inequality that exists. And to focus on energy in the community, to focus on rewilding. Green roots was an idea that we had, to encourage people to obviously give up car usage and think of mobility in public spaces in a very different way. And we were very fortunate in Camden to have a council which had declared a climate and ecological emergency. One of the benefits of the student actions, the student strikes, Extinction Rebellion in 2019 was to launch a movement of declarations by local authorities, by cities, by artists, by musicians, of people who declared a climate and ecological emergency. And obviously our parliament, the UK Parliament, also declared that. And I think those declarations are very, very important because they underline a commitment to recognizing that the truth is that we are in a moment of crisis, and that, you know, climate change won't be dealt with on an incremental way, that the biodiversity crisis is huge, the inequality crisis is huge, and that all of these are linked to the way in which we have an economic system which is extractive and has been deeply, deeply unequal and based on white supremacy, and is based on gender inequality, is based on othering and giving a lesser value to those who don't perform as well in its service. You know, so I read the chat, for example, you know, disabled people, people who are less able and considered so in the capitalist economy, transgender people, all of those people are othered by capitalism in a way which diminishes their contribution to society. And what we're hoping is that the way in which everyone can contribute to reimagining a kinder, better, more equal world, which is more community-based, is to start from where you are. You don't have to all move to, you know, Devon or Sussex or anywhere else. You have to look at where the populations of the world are, and most of them live in urban settings, and you have to convert our cities into the kinds of communities that people want to live in and feel that they belong in. And the way to do that is to transform our concept of what shops are, what community centres are, what libraries are, what railway platforms are, to take over, in essence, some of these spaces and start using them and mash them up and create artistic spaces from commercial spaces and vice versa, and to get citizens essentially to take over doing that. And I hope that, you know, the Extinction Rebellion, and if some of those people are listening, you know, that maybe the next wave of rebelling and actions will be more solutions orientated, that will take over instead of just protesting in public squares. Will take over, you know, rebels will take over disused shops and premises and occupy them, as Occupy did originally, but to start essentially running community kitchens, community gardens in inclusive ways, wherever space lends itself to that. And I think from that will grow a different way of bypassing some of the traditional power, by bypassing, for example, huge supermarkets, running food-based cooperative movements, which are popping up everywhere, including today. I just spent a bit of time finding out about a number of them here outside of London, and maybe that will help contribute to solving the enormous problems of food poverty we have in the UK. We had enormous problems of food poverty before COVID came along, actually. We had millions of children in this country, you know, one of the richest countries in the world, not being able to feed its children. We've just had a debate last week about the lack of provision for free school meals to children during term time. This is one of the richest countries in the world that's turning around and saying that there is no need for that. So we're looking at a system and a government that is completely bankrupt. And I feel that the way in which we will build countervailing power, that we will build our muscle to create a new vision, is to start essentially from the hyper-local, to start from every high street, every ward, every community. And my sort of end point is, you know, I've attended pretty much every single UN summit since 1991 on climate change. I've been to almost all of these big meetings called the Conference of the Parties. We have a big COP called COP26, which is scheduled for Glasgow next year now, a year on from COVID. And I think that actually community is the new COP. You know, we have to not all fly off to places, and we have to spend a lot more time in our communities building with our imagination, with collaboration, the kinds of spaces that we want. We have to design cities and urban spaces so that none of us needs to live more than 15 minutes away by walking, or 20 minutes away from where we're walking. And I think you know, thinkers like Kate Raworth, whose work I admire enormously, are really helping us design local safe spaces that can be joined up. And I think those are the ways in which we can do that in the future. So I think I'll end there, because I hope there will be some questions. I'll leave you these slides, and I hope that it's a very recent thing that we've done in Camden. It's very experimental. There's lots of flaws and shortcomings, as ever there are in a startup, but I'm very happy to be contacted and to talk to anyone who wants to create their own pop-up in their own community, and to help us as well, you know, learn from what others have been doing elsewhere. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Farhana. Thank you. That was very interesting. One question that I thought of whilst you were speaking was, you spoke about how community is the new COP. And because of COVID, lots of people are now working at home, and there's plenty of office spaces that are empty. If people see offices like that in their own community, what practical tips could they take to actually do something? How would they, to emulate what you've done in Camden, what could they do?
So I think that's a great question. It's very early days, but our buildings are a huge asset that can be used in many different ways. So originally, before COVID, we were hoping that, you know, these great foyers, these great empty spaces sometimes that are very underused, they're reception spaces or a meeting room, you know, most buildings are empty 2/3 of their lifetime, because they were open mainly in office hours, so that they can be given over to young entrepreneurs, to artists, that, you know, art can be taken to office spaces rather than just be in theatres. So it's like a total reimagining of space, literally, of redefining spaces. So if you look at what happened in the Industrial Revolution, actually it was complemented by a system of zoning. So we created a zoned city, we created a business zone, we created a residence zone, we zoned suburbs, we put all the polluting activities, usually where the poor people and the Black people lived, you know, and so we need to reimagine what a different kind of zoning would look like. And I think from COVID, we're learning actually that perhaps one of the longer term trends will be working from home, that we've, you know, imagined far better ways of connecting with people. If we can get over the lack of the digital access to many, we can overcome that, but we can try and make much more use of our connectedness. And from that will come the realization that you can't just go past a really horrible derelict area every day just because, you know, you don't care about it. You're on your way to your lovely house or your lovely office, and we'll have to care about all of it because it belongs to all of us. Then it's on us to fix it. So I hope that, you know, we'll find imaginative ways in which we can make use of these spaces. And for a while, you know, COVID is stopping that because everyone is fearful, but I think that there's a great bonus from the freeing up of all of this office space that will come.
Brilliant, thank you. And one last question. What success did Think and Do have? What have you learned from it?
I think the biggest success was that when you ask people for ideas, they come up with a million ideas. And then if they can discuss how to support each other and they have the help of the council staff to implement some of those ideas, grow those ideas, then actually it's a great unleashing of their energies. They feel energized. So as I said, it's early days for some of these ideas. You know, we've only had sort of 6 months, but I think having the policymakers and the citizens be in a space where they feel they're equals and have equal say and an equal voice is tremendously exciting, and shows that there's a new way in which we can do democracy, and experimenting at the local level is a great place to start.